Hello, everybody. I am Lillian Thorpe. I'm the director of Nancy Margolis Gallery, and welcome to today's Artist Talk with Mitch Mantle. Today, Mitch and I are going to look at and discuss the paintings in his current solo exhibition, Waxing and Waning. And before we dive in, I'll share a few details about his background. Currently based in Gilbert, Arizona, Mitch Mantle was born in St. George, Utah. He received his BFA from Southern Virginia University and his MFA in printmaking from the University of Arizona. He is currently a full-time faculty member at Glendale Community College, where he teaches studio art. After Mitch and I are done discussing, I will open it up to questions and comments from the audience. Feel free at any point during the conversation to type a question or a comment into the chat box, and I will read it aloud at the end. Or you can click on the raise hand icon and I will call on you. And now I will start screen sharing so we can begin. Well, I thought a good place to start would be the title of your exhibition, which is Waxing and Waning. And that phrase calls to mind many different aspects to me, but I'm curious why you chose that title for your exhibition and how it encapsulates your paintings as a whole.
Yeah, so it took me a while to come up with a title. Titles can be very difficult. Sometimes they come a little bit quicker. But at the time when I was doing these paintings, I came across some things and learned some new things about the phases of the moon. And in some of my paintings, you'll see some crescent moons and, some full moons and things. But I was fascinated with the two terms, waxing and waning. So basically just the process of the moon getting bigger, right? Starting from nothing and then growing into a full moon, and then the moon shrinking down and dissipating into nothing, and then being reborn again. And I related that a lot to kind of how I approach life, and with my work as well. What I do in my work is I really try to reflect on things that I'm thinking about or going through. And I'm a huge believer, and I get really excited about the topic of progression and what it means to grow and become a better person. And waxing and waning. So for those who don't know, I'm not an astronomer, but waxing is when the moon is getting bigger, right? And so and I figured out this little cool trick too. If I hold my right hand up into a crescent moon, I can tell if the moon is waxing or waning because it's matching my dominant hand. And then if it's waning, which means that it's, getting smaller, I can hold up my left hand and I can see that the crescent moon is matching my non-dominant, weaker hand. And so I thought this was fascinating. And I every time I see the moon, I hold my hand up and just check what it is. But as we, go throughout our lives, me in particular, I was always focused on just trying to be happy. And I've learned that happiness is overrated, I feel like. And what I mean by that is we tend to just focus on, okay, if I'm happy, then everything's good, right? Everything's great. I have everything figured out. But there's a lot of sadness and frustration and pain in our lives. And I think that instead of, trying to just focus on happiness, we need to focus more on meaning, right? And just like the phases of the moon, they're gonna grow. The moon's gonna get bigger, get stronger, and it's gonna be, a really great time. Things are going good. You can see everything that's growing. But also the moon is going to be weaker and it's going to dissipate and, get smaller and smaller. And I think that our hard times, our sadness, our frustrations, our failures are just as important as our happiness. And people don't like to feel that, right? They don't like to experience that all the time. And so in my artwork, I really try to focus on the good and bad times, and knowing that just like the moon, when something's bad, it's going to get good again. And when something's good, it's going to get bad again, but it's just going to repeat, and it's going to be that constant, right?
Mhm.
And so in my paintings, I like to focus on the relationships that I have with people, buildings, animals, things like that. And I like to think about those things, right? So like, what's going on in my life right now? Is there sadness? Is there happiness? And what can I learn from that? And how do I get better?
Mhm.
So that's kind of how I came up with that title. And it's pretty mysterious, the title too. Like, you're like, okay, well, what does that mean? Not really sure. Maybe you associate it with the moon, but I thought it was, had just enough information there to kind of give the viewer, a little bit of interest, and to figure out what's going on. So
Yeah, absolutely. It is broad enough that it sparks curiosity. And I'm interested in hearing everything you just said about sort of the shift between happiness and sadness, lightness and darkness. And when I was thinking about the title in relation to your work, I was thinking about, how the sense of waxing and waning is sort of an ebb and flow, or a shift between two extremes or opposing forces. And I see that a lot in your work. There are sort of contrasts, abstract versus figural, personal versus symbolism, or symbolic, imagination versus reality. And oops, I can see that a lot in your work. And it's something that you specifically touch on in your artist statement. You write, in my own work, figures, animals, and buildings interact in a metaphoric narrative that is autobiographical and hopefully universal. And to me, 3 paintings of yours sort of jump out as embodying this metaphoric narrative. The one we were just looking at, Bird Catchers, this one, Waning Dog at Midnight, and Paloma. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on that sense of a metaphoric narrative and how you see that in your paintings, or these 3 specifically.
yeah, so relationships are a big part in our everyday lives, and for me, that's when I like to observe and try to learn from that. And I find it fascinating, the relationships between me and, animals and people, and just kind of how I interact with them. If I act a certain way, how they respond, and then how other people respond, and animals and things respond back to me. And it's just been really interesting. These animals here are some dogs that we've had, that they're not my dogs, but they're family members' dogs. And it's really great to see them and to be able to experience them and their personalities, when I don't live with them all the time, right? So I can come and I can kind of investigate, what they're doing, why they're doing things, and what makes them tick. And also be able to relate to them too. And then also relating to people that I come across in my life. I love trying to be empathetic with people, and that's what I try to do when I teach as well. If I can relate to somebody, or understand where they're coming from, then I can understand how to better help them, and help them progress and problem solve and figure things out. In my work, I use, a lot of different symbols, some that I kind of made up myself, or just put meaning to. And so, if I have for instance, the waning dog at midnight, the piece in the middle, there's I use a lot of there's a lot of generic symbolism that I'll use that everybody kind of gets. There's a lot of it's tied to biblical too. There's some like biblical symbolism as well. And I came across a story one time about Jesus Christ being uh, like related to the palm branch.
Mhm.
And, he kind of symbolized that because the palm branch is always green, right? And I live in Arizona where there's a lot of palm trees. And so I've had a time to reflect and have these relationships with palm trees. But in this piece right here, the Waning Dog at Midnight, the palm branch is kind of turning, you know, a different color, maybe dying in a certain way, but there's still some life on that tree. And so it just gave me a time to reflect on that. Also the animal in there. I know I'm giving you guys all breaking it down exactly. And
No, I
maybe
think that's helpful.
yeah, maybe you don't like hearing all the, the mystery or just all of it explained, but the dog is an older dog, and it's been interesting seeing the dog get older, and we can kind of see life sped up rather than seeing a human kind of, get older. That one takes a little bit more time, right? But with this dog, it's like every time I see the dog, it's a little bit older and acts a little bit different. And so those two kind of are, in a relationship together, the palm branch and the dog, and then the symbolism connected with the waxing moon up in the right hand corner. So yeah, so that's kind of the symbolism that I built upon it and made it more autobiographical. It's about things that I'm experiencing, but I'm also going through as well. So
Got it. Yeah, that's really interesting, and I'm glad you delved into the symbolism. That's one major theme in your work that has definitely stood out to me. As we can see here, the white doves, the moon, the red apples. There are these repeating themes that give the paintings an allegorical undertone or mythical, and they make me think of more universal themes as opposed to the everyday. And then by contrast, I feel like a couple of your paintings, including this one, Daydreamer, and Silverfish and Citrus Fruit, to me, these feel like maybe they're rooted more in your everyday life, more autobiographical. I'm curious if that's the case, or if you could just talk about these interior scenes and how they relate to your metaphoric narratives, and how you sort of intermingle those two.
yeah, so I've talked to you about the piece Daydreamer before, Lillian, and I think you were asking, who is the person in the piece. And again, I like to, focus on people and relationships that I have with people, but sometimes figures that I'll put in my paintings, they can represent a lot of different people, right? Sometimes they're more specific, but I think I used my wife as a kind of a catalyst to base that off of, and the idea of this painting. And Daydreamer specifically, it's one thing that I love about artwork, or when I create work, is I'm able to take something that is kind of mundane or maybe overlooked, like, setting the table or cleaning, cooking, your day-to-day chores, and really reflect on them and kind of understand, okay, well, why do we do these things? And sometimes we struggle through our day-to-day and these little small tasks, but they're meaningful, right? And that's why we go about doing them. And with my wife, with her, she's a dreamer. She's kind of put her life on hold so that I could be a dreamer, and I've just kind of really had a chance to reflect on how she's sacrificed, but I also see that that sacrifice is, it's also painful, and can be really hard, but she's doing it for me, and that's just a really motivating beautiful thing, right? I think it's the ultimate act of love, uh, and so that painting was pretty easy to kind of put down because
Mhm.
it's something that I go about every day. And as far as the citrus fruit and silverfish painting, um, I thought a lot about my position, kind of tagging along with like that juxtaposition with my wife. Like I'm the one who's the breadwinner, and having to provide for my family. And sometimes, growing up, I just kind of overlooked, and there was food on the table, and I was like, okay, great. This is, not really thinking so much of where this came from. But in this painting, I really had a chance to reflect on, okay, like, I have to provide for my family. I have to provide for myself, and this life, like this fish and this fruit, they are helping me survive. Um, and again, those mundane things or overlooked things are actually these really powerful and significant things if we focus on them and appreciate them. Um, some of the symbolism too with the apples, or most of the time I'll do citrus fruit, because here in Arizona, uh when I first got here, my in-laws, they live in um an old citrus grove, and so there's citrus trees all over, and I was fascinated with those. And one thing I love about citrus fruit, um is the process of them uh reproducing and growing more out of their seed, and that you know um is a direct connection with being a father and raising kids and helping them become good people, so that if they want to have kids, they can do the same thing and continue this good process. So yeah, that's a little bit about those two paintings. And those two, what's frustrating or fascinating is that they were really frustrating as well.
Hmm.
My paintings are, uh, I usually struggle through them a lot, but with these two in particular, I really struggled. I had the concepts down, but I really was frustrated, and it really gave me a chance to build a relationship with my paintings. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
And I was going to ask you, you just touched on it, but I was going to ask what the process of putting together a composition is like for you. Is it a struggle, or do you have a vision of how it's going to turn out when you begin, or does the process sort of inform the outcome? Yeah.
So I think there's a little bit of both there.
Mhm.
I'll usually have an idea, but it's very vague and broad, and I'm like, oh, I loved the way my wife was sitting at the
Mhm.
table, just kind of staring off and thinking, or whatever the case is. And then I think, oh, I love the way the window's sitting behind her.
Mhm.
And then I just try to incorporate that and mess around with composition. And then as I start putting the painting down, things will start to form naturally.
Mhm.
And kind of as I struggle through, I guess, like an awkwardly natural way. But uh and uh it's really satisfying at the end, where I'm like, okay, how did I get to this point? Like, what made this and what made this? And and I really learned that um if I just put something down on my painting,
Mhm.
then that allows me to react, right? So much time I've just been sitting in front of my painting waiting for something to happen, and I've realized that I've wasted a lot of time, and the painting's not going to paint itself. And I had an artist friend tell me, inspiration is overrated. I keep saying overrated. Everything's overrated. No, but it's overrated. But when inspiration does come, you know, you better have your brush in your hand. right?
Mhm.
And so that's what I try to do. I try to just put things down and then I react to them, and problem solve and figure it out. And so that's why I struggle through my paintings a lot, because sometimes I have no idea where I'm going with it. And I'm just trying to really, figure it out. But I also love that process because it is so relatable to life.
Mhm. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Speaking sort of about your process, your paintings contain representational elements and figural elements, but they're also very abstract and they have non-representational qualities. How much are you thinking about that while you paint, this balance between abstraction and figuration?
Yeah, it's really, it can be really difficult because you don't want to give too much information, like what I was saying earlier, where I basically gave all the information about my painting, which I don't really like doing that so much, because I like my viewers to have an imagination and really look at the painting and figure things out for themselves, right? Explore it themselves, and then just give them just enough where they can be like, oh, okay, this is what the artist is going for. This is what he's trying to say. And then tie those two things together, their interpretation and my direction, and then hopefully marry to a really successful way. I am a big fan of abstracting things and trying to find different ways to portray figures and figures, animals, buildings, tubs, like the image you see on the board. And I found that it can be really challenging to do that, but it's also really satisfying when you do finally figure out a good balance. What's interesting is I actually teach traditional life drawing. And so we have, our nude models come in, and I'm teaching my students how to make drawings that are, as representational and realistic as they possibly can make it. And so it's a really interesting way to do these two things. And I think it's really important that I understand the figure so that I know how to abstract the figure and to make it work. And the human figure can be really difficult sometimes to portray, because we are fluent in body language. We all know how to read body language. Something changes of a facial feature, the eyebrows raise or go higher or whatever, or lower, and it changes their the person's feeling or just look or mood or whatever. And so there's a lot of different components that go into it. But yeah, sorry, I was kind of going on a tangent there, but
No, that was great. And I
that
think,
answers your question.
yeah, it definitely does. And I think that's so evident in your work, and it helps create this sort of push-pull of specific and universal imagery. I feel like I can relate to some of your figures, but then they also have such an abstract quality that it brings it beyond myself to a universal level, which I think you do very well. Going back to your process a little bit, I just want to discuss some of the technical aspects of your paintings. All of the work in this show, except for one, which we'll talk about next, is acrylic with collage. And what draws you to collage, and what is the significance of including that in your paintings, and how does that inform the narratives?
Collage allows me to add a different element to problem solve. I found that I found that collage is sometimes overlooked, but it's a really great way to move the composition around, add things quickly, place them in different spots. So if you look, the marigolds that are on the lawn, those are, I think most of them are collaged. And so I had to move those around the the painting to figure out exactly where I wanted to place them. And yeah, so I've loved collage. It's been, I think, a really good, you know, part of my painting process, and it adds another layer of texture too. And I try to build up my layers as much as I can. So my paintings, if you guys, I wish you could see them in person, but you know, I feel paintings are usually better in person, and my paintings in particular have a lot of texture and layers. You know, you'll look at them and you'll see the struggle that I went through to figure out and to place, you know, things in the right area, or you know, where I feel like they should be. But yeah, collage has been, you know, one of my favorite mediums to use.
Awesome. I love collage and I love seeing it in your work. In this painting in particular, I notice the background up here has some looks like pencil sketches. And do you usually start with sort of a sketch, a preparatory sketch of your work, and then put the paint in the collage over, or talk about how you begin a painting?
Yeah, so it just depends. Sometimes I'll see another artist and their approach, and I'll be like, oh, I want to try that. And I'll start adding that, or go about it doing it that way. I like to change up my process. I think that it can be stagnant if you do the same thing over and over. I, with this one in particular, I kind of drew out, you know, with a big graphite stick, just a composition, and I don't even think I stuck with that composition. But again, it was something, you know, going back to what I was saying earlier, it's something that I can base my next move off of and react to it. And so sometimes I'll start with collage, sometimes I'll start with a drawing, or even just start painting straight onto the canvas. So I try to keep it fresh when in the video, and you know, go about it different.
Yeah, absolutely. Setting the Table 4 is the only monoprint in the show, and I really love this work. And I'd love to hear a little bit about how printmaking informs your practice, and does the act of printmaking influence your paintings? And then just for reference, I put up Setting the Table number 5 to the left. So these are two versions of the same theme. And I know you studied printmaking in school, and I'm curious if you could talk about how that plays a role in your work.
Yeah, I've been told by people who don't know me or know my history, they'll come in and they'll see my paintings, and they'll say, and then they'll find out that I was a printmaker, and they'll be, oh, that makes sense, right? The way that your process in painting is a lot like a printmaker. I did study printmaking in school. I loved it, felt, you know, with it, and wanted to be just a traditional printmaker, but I soon realized that the process for me was just a little bit too slow, and not as immediate. And I wanted to get more, I just wanted to produce more quickly instead of being stuck on the same print. You know, you work so hard on a print and then you print an edition of like 40, and it just takes a lot of time. And I really have a great appreciation for traditional printmakers. But for me, it just wasn't jiving, but I learned a lot of really great things from printmaking. Monoprint is, you know, probably one of the closest ways to being a painter, like close family to painting. And these are monoprints, and also intaglios. And I use the intaglio as the matrix, right, as the matrix of the composition, and then I printed different monoprints over the intaglios. So there's, I believe, 5, right? So it's Setting the Table 4 and Setting the Table 5, and so they're all a little bit different. and but maybe just change just a little bit. But yeah, what I do is I'll actually print off um uh, a lot of textures and images and colors and stuff on thinner Japanese paper, and then I'll use that paper to collage with. And so it just gives me more of a variety when I'm trying to problem solve and be like, oh, I have something perfect for this. When I printed in grad school or whatever, I had this red, and it was, and then I grab up and figure out exactly where it needs to go, and it just adds another element, and I've really enjoyed it, and I still do a little bit of printmaking.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I think I might be one of those people who said, when I learned that you were a printmaker, it sort of made sense to me, because many qualities of your paintings have this stark flatness, which I think is inherent in printmaking, and it definitely shines through, and they work together really beautifully.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Well, we are about halfway through, so I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience. A reminder that you can type a question into the chat box and I will read it aloud, or you can click on the raise hand icon. We do have a couple of questions already. This first one is from Gail Spain, a fellow NMG artist. She says, your work is very graphic in regards to your color choices. Can you talk about how your color choices, brown, red, green, black, and white, reflect your ideas about being a dreamer?
Yeah, so color is a whole nother monster, right? It's just, there's so many things that go into picking the right color, messing with, the transparencies of color and making them more opaque. What I try to do is I try to simplify the color, right? And I guess that's why I have a lot of straight colors that look like they're almost out of the tube, right? And I challenge myself to not go with maybe my first instinct on what color I should pick for something, or put down. And I try to ask myself, okay, what wouldn't be a typical color you would use in this area? And how can I make that work? And that's why, you'll see, especially in the Daydreamer painting, there's this brown table, but in the background, there's these pastel pinks and greens and whites and purples, right? And sometimes you might not think that those two things go together or work well together. But I like to challenge myself and to find those, find solutions. And as far as like it, connecting it to being a dreamer, that's a good question. I think I try to have my work as playful as possible, in a way where people can be attracted to it, or just like not, well, maybe attracted, but drawn to it in a way where it's like eye-popping, and then, oh, like what's going on over there? And I try my best to have a lot of neutrals and grays and blacks and whites to really try to level that out and have a good balance, because it's really easy to overdo it with color. And I find myself doing that a lot, and then I try to pull back as much as I can.
Branching off of Gail's question, because I know you use a lot of visual symbols in your paintings, but does color itself ever become a symbol? I'm thinking of Italian Renaissance paintings where, ultramarine blue symbolized royalty, or, the Virgin Mary. And do you use color in that sense to represent overarching themes?
Yeah, I do, and they'll change too. I know that everybody everybody, but a lot of artists or people have kind of associated colors with certain things, and we kind of have already done that too. And I'll use that, like the general, like, maybe red for anger or green for jealousy or whatever, right? But I don't necessarily do that all the time. I kind of like to come up with my own. I just try to, so for instance, like with that particular painting, the brown starts to emerge, right? It's lacking those things that it needs to survive. Sun, water, nutrients, things that makes it thrive. And so in that way, I'll use color as a symbolism. And there's other, different parts of my paintings that I've done the same thing.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Another question about your color from Anne. She asks, can you address how you build up your colors? There's an exceptional richness to your paint quality.
Yeah, I think this goes a lot with printmaking, what printmaking taught me. In printmaking, I fell in love with the transparent base, which turns your inks. Usually your inks will be, some will be more transparent and some will be more opaque. Most of them are opaque that I found. And so they have a transparent base that you mix in with it. And that allows you to see through that color a little bit to what's behind. And that adds another element of, of layer of history. But it also makes it more vibrant too. So because you're kind of seeing the whites of the paper behind, right? Or whatever's behind it. And so I have to be really careful on what I'm adding behind certain things when I put down a color. But yeah, transparency, that's one thing that I really try to play with in my studio and work with, and try to come up with different ways to use that to help build depth and history in my work.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Our next question is by Alex Griffin, another NMG artist. And he says, I really enjoy how your compositions come off and on the canvas. Is this something you concentrate on? So like the three-dimensionality and the textures of your surfaces, is that something you're thinking about?
Yeah, I do think about that a lot, because I want to make these paintings, even though they're abstracted, I want them to feel like you can be in these scenes, right? And that's why I like working so big. And usually my imagery, the figures are almost life-size, or just where you can, feel like you could have a conversation with these figures. And so coming off the breaking the border and having the image bleed off the border, I think just adds a little bit more of a personal element. And it's not just kind of trapped in this little space. And yeah, and it just adds more to it, because it adds more mystery as well. I mean, you look at it and you're like, oh, what is this thing that's coming off the, into the composition? And I wonder what's going on, where that person's going or whatever, right? And that just adds mystery, which is one of my favorite things about looking at art. It's like, okay, what's going on? Like, what can I decipher about this, and make this, relate to me?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know you said that inspiration is overrated, but I'm going to ask you an inspiration question. What painters or artists have inspired your work? And are there, specific people in art history or the contemporary art world who sort of fuel your creativity?
Yeah, I'm not saying all, artists are not overrated. I mean, some might be, right? But that's a different discussion. But no, I'm inspired by a lot of different things. That comment didn't come off as a negative
Oh, no, not
way.
at all.
But yeah, but I am inspired by a lot of different things, and some of my favorite artists are more of the, the ones in mid-century that I found. But I mean, it's all over, right?
Mhm,
All throughout our history. I think we all fall in love with different aspects of different artists. But
mhm,
some of my main artists that I really am drawn to um, are I love Paul Klee. I
mm,
know that he's a little bit more abstract than I am, but um, I love his colors, the way he uses transparency, and uh, I think he's one of the all-time greats. Um, I love Marie Cassatt. I love her intimacy of her, being a woman and having women and children in her paintings,
mhm,
which I think is something that's very relatable to me, with me always observing my kids and my wife,
mhm,
right? So I've fallen in love with her work. And also, there's some other, artists that aren't necessarily they don't really match up with my work.
mhm,
Some are more traditional and do representational stuff, but and I'll try to take from them, so there's this gallery, or this um I can't, in New York, and some of you might have heard of it, but it's the Grand Central Art Academy. And I have a friend who teaches there, and uh I love seeing their work, and they're traditional based, and adding different elements that I'm seeing from their stuff into mine
mhm.
is always fun. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I definitely see some of those mid-century influences in your work. And then I also just personally keep going back to much older work, from the Renaissance, which is just sort of chock full of symbolism. But yeah, I can
Yeah.
definitely see all those artists in your practice. We have a question from Nancy Gruskin. She asks, does your teaching affect your studio practice and vice versa?
Yes, it does. I found a lot of my answers to things when I'm teaching.
Mhm.
I'll start explaining something to one of my students, and I'll be like, oh, like, yeah, like I'm preaching to the choir, like I'm saying something that I need to implement in my studio practice. Um, and I think that being a practicing artist has been really beneficial for me as I try to relate to my students. And it's a good way for them to see somebody who is a working artist as well as doing other things, and being a family person. And, um, so uh, they both really help influence each other.
Mhm. Thank you. Um, Christine mentioned bird imagery as symbols, and you did go into sort of, you explained how your certain symbols, what they mean to you. Could you talk to us a little bit more about the birds in your paintings and, what their significance is?
Yeah. I think birds are really fascinating. I'm not a bird watcher, some of my friends are. I mean, I watch them and observe them, but I'm not, not as extreme as some of my friends. But I think birds are fascinating, and I think there is a lot of symbolism there, and I love the different types of birds,
Mhm,
um, and how they each kind of have their own symbolism that has tied with them, right? Um, and uh, and so periodically I'll have birds in my paintings, um, and I mean, there's just so many things that are relatable to animals,
mhm,
and they you I mean, they're doing the same things we are, right? They're trying to provide for themselves and for their children and people, other birds around them or whatever, but they're
mhm,
also territorial. And and trying to survive. And so it's a way for me to reflect. And when I put things in there, certain birds, like the paloma is a dove, and I put nightingales in my paintings and the symbolism behind nightingales. And so
Yeah, I remember you saying in your artist statement that you are every man, woman, and animal that you draw. So
mhm.
I can see this sort of empathetic connection with these animals as living creatures who are like you and like me.
Yeah, when I first put that down as in my artist statement,
Mhm.
I was like, oh, that kind of sounds weird, right? But it's also uh I think it's really true, because we're always reflecting and thinking about things, but we're always trying to relate to others and to people
Mhm.
and to things. And so when I paint, that's what I'm doing.
Mhm.
Um, and one of my favorite things about being an artist is being in my studio, um, where I can be by myself and I have time to think,
Mhm.
right? Especially with two little kids, I'm like, I need some time by myself.
Totally.
So yeah, but I love having them as studio mates as well. So but yeah, so
Yeah, speaking of your children, how has being a parent um, changed or transformed your studio life, or even the content of your work, if at all? Mhm.
it's really affected my work,
Yeah.
and how I think about things. Becoming a parent, for those who are parents, is really just you're totally um shift the way that you think. And so I've had to figure out how to be an artist and be a father and a husband at the same time, and it's been really a great journey, and it's really pushed me
Mhm.
to be better and to work harder.
Mhm.
um so my wife, like I said earlier, she's sacrificed a lot because she's an artist as well. She's a seamstress and painter, and does things too, and she's chose this life to be a mother, but she's also doing so many great things as an artist still, right? And just because I know sometimes artists think that having kids is like this death sentence as an artist, right? But I've seen her thrive uh as a mom and an artist, and I think it's enriched her experience as an artist and made her work even better. Same
Mhm.
with me,
Mhm.
um, and it's been great to have this journey through that.
Mhm.
Somebody who understands kind of what I'm going through, and as a parent and artist. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I had one more question about your work. You've discussed how you are a dreamer and like dreaming qualities in other people. I'm curious if you ever get content for your paintings from your dreams, if you pull from your actual dreams.
Yeah. So in my artist statement, I talk a little bit about things that can breach our subconscious.
Yeah.
That's what I love about my process is I'm trying to react to things that I'm doing, right? And putting down on the canvas. And what happens is things will breach the surface of my
Mhm.
subconscious and come out, and I'll be like, oh, like, I didn't know I felt that way about this. Or um and but as far as dreams go, I think, I have dreams, and as far as like, at night sleeping and stuff,
Yeah.
but I think I almost like to daydream
Mhm.
and more a little bit and kind of form my own dreams. And I don't necessarily think, oh, I had this dream about this palm tree and whatever, but I try to kind of form my own and just use them almost as a daydream in a way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. Um, all right, I think we have time for one more question. Liffy asks, you are a parent of young children and a teacher. Do you think schools include art enough? What should or could schools be doing and why? Do you feel like art has a big enough role in schools?
I at certain schools it does.
Mhm.
And I can't say you know, I can't be the spokesman for all schools, but from my opinion, in my school,
Mhm.
of course, I think that it can be incorporated a lot more.
Mhm.
Um, there's a bad stigma to being an artist, um, and there's also really great things that go, that come along with it too. But I'll see in my students, a lot of them will be so hesitant to become art
Mhm.
majors, um, and I just try to encourage them in ways that I feel that can help them, pursue things that they want to do and be, because a lot of them are just second guessing themselves. And
Mhm.
when they hear things from, social media or just whatever about being an artist and trying to provide for yourself, there are a lot of negative things that come out. And so what happens is you get that from students, and then the colleges or universities are saying to themselves, oh, well, we need to be more practical, right? And we need to have degrees that are, where people can make a lot of money. So
Mhm.
um, at my school, of course, we definitely could be promoting it a lot more.
Yeah.
Uh, hopefully the president of my school is on right now, so they can
Mhm.
need a gallery at my school, and because students need to be exposed to art, and I think that art can also be a really intimidating thing because
Mhm.
people are like, well, I don't know what that means, or I don't get that. And but if you open it up to where it's something that people can enjoy and appreciate, it will really enrich in their life like it
Mhm.
has mine. And I was talking with Lillian before the call. I kind of grew up in um, sports centered home, and I'm really grateful for all the things that I learned from sports. But when I got to college, I learned uh, I chose the art direction, and I learned how to really appreciate things, everything, all aspects, because of art. Art was just kind of that vehicle that was guiding me, you
Mhm.
know. So um yeah.
Yeah, I remember you saying that you sort of feared taking the leap to becoming an artist or majoring in art because with that comes so many uncertainties about the future. But I love that you impart on your students that, it's possible and, it can really enrich your life, like you're saying.
Yeah, it is possible. And what I found is you don't have to do what I'm doing. You don't
Mhm.
have to, but you can have some element of what you want to do in your career.
Mhm.
I mean, if I could just be an artist and not have to worry about anything else, that'd be great,
Mhm.
but I'm teaching, which I love, and I'm really grateful for it. But it's something that maybe it's more challenging sometimes too, especially to balance as with being an artist.
Mhm.
So I think people are like, oh, well, if I don't make it all the way, and uh, and I'm not exactly what my hero artist is, then I'm not successful. And
Mhm.
so we draw limitations
Yeah,
for ourselves.
perfect. Thank you so much. I am going to squeeze in one more short question. This is from Meredith, and she asks, do you do small paintings in addition to large ones? Because most of
Yeah.
the work in the show is quite large, and I think that's a great question.
Yeah. Um, people don't be intimidated by my bigger paintings.
Mhm.
As far as putting them in your house, I think that bigger paintings can be really intimidating because it's like, well, how do I make this work, right? But I've had collectors buy my work where um they've really made a good home for the painting, even though it's at a large scale.
Mhm.
And but yes, I do make smaller paintings. A lot of my smaller paintings are studies for larger paintings, but usually like I'll fall in love with my smaller paintings, just because I have less pressure on them.
Mhm.
And I'm not trying to be something or do something that is, forceful. So yeah, but I make smaller paintings.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Well, we are right about at 3 o'clock. And I really love this conversation, and I learned so much about you and what motivates your work. Before signing off, I just want to remind everybody that Mitch's show, Waxing and Waning, is on display in our online viewing room through next Friday, October 28th. And we do have a printed catalog available to purchase, which you can find by going to our website and looking at his show. And feel free to email me with any inquiries. And thank you again so much for everybody for joining us today. I think this was a wonderful turnout.
Yeah.
And thank you,
Thank,
Mitch.
yeah, thank you, Lillian. And I just want to say I appreciate everybody listening and being here. It's been great. So thank you.